The midday sun hung low and cruel over the dusty county auction yard, where the scent of sweat, hay, and rusted iron mixed in the dry air. Beneath the faded banner that read Annual Livestock Auction, a restless crowd gathered, farmers in sweat-stained hats, traders with folded arms, and a few curious onlookers looking for a bargain or a show. The ringmaster's voice cracked through a megaphone, shouting prices and numbers that echoed across the bleachers. Hooves clattered against wooden boards as one horse after another was paraded before the crowd, each one judged by the size of its muscles or the shine of its coat. None of them drew much attention until the last gate creaked open. From the shadows stepped a stallion unlike the others, a gaunt, trembling creature, his black coat dulled by dust and neglect. One eye was clouded white, the other burned with wary confusion. His ribs pressed sharply against his skin, and every step he took seemed uncertain, as though the ground might collapse beneath him. The murmurs began at once. "That one's half dead," someone said, and laughter followed. "Should be sent straight to the glue factory," another called. The auctioneer grinned at the mockery, adjusting his hat before tapping the microphone. "All right, folks, we've got ourselves a fine mystery here. What do we start at? $10? $5? No. All right then, $1. The laughter grew louder, echoing off the wooden rafters. At the edge of the crowd stood Ethan Cole, his hat pulled low, a quiet man who rarely spoke and never drew attention to himself. His hands were rough from years of ranch work, his clothes worn but clean, and his expression unreadable. He had come not to buy, but to look, to fill the empty afternoon, maybe to distract his thoughts from the silence of his small ranch, where the memory of his late father still lingered in every stall and fence post. But when his eyes met the trembling horse in the ring, something inside him shifted. There was something familiar in that broken stance, in the defeated droop of the animal's head. It was not pity that gripped him, but recognition. The auctioneer kept teasing the crowd. "Come on now, someone give me $1 just to take him off our hands. He's eaten feed that costs more than he's worth." The laughter turned into jeers, but Ethan's voice, soft yet firm, broke through it. "I'll take him." The auctioneer blinked, startled. "You serious, son?" Ethan nodded once. A hush spread through the bleachers, followed by an explosion of amusement. "He'll need another $1 just to bury it," someone shouted. The auctioneer smirked, shrugged, and slammed the gavel down. "Sold for $1." As the crowd erupted again, Ethan stepped forward. The stallion flinched when he approached, nostrils flaring, hooves scraping nervously against the floor. The handler let out a sigh of relief and shoved the rope into Ethan's hands, eager to be rid of the animal. Up close, Ethan could see the scars along the horse's flank, the dullness in its mane, and the shallow, uneven breaths. He placed his hand lightly on the stallion's neck. The horse jerked back, but didn't pull away completely. Ethan's voice lowered to a whisper. "Easy, boy. No one's gonna hurt you now." For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded. The animal blinked once, then exhaled, a sound heavy with exhaustion and surrender. Behind them, laughter continued. "That fella's got more heart than sense," an old man muttered. Ethan heard it but didn't look back. He had no answer for their mockery, no defense worth giving. He simply took the rope and began leading the horse toward the exit. The stallion resisted at first, digging his hooves into the dirt, but when Ethan gave a gentle tug, the animal followed, limping, hesitant, yet obedient. The onlookers' amusement softened into something else, something quieter. A few turned away, embarrassed by their own cruelty. Outside the auction yard, the light had dimmed to gold. Dust swirled around their feet as the wind picked up across the open fields. Ethan stopped by a trough, filled his cupped hands with water, and offered it to the horse. The stallion sniffed uncertain before lowering his muzzle and drinking greedily, water dripping down his jaw. Ethan smiled faintly. "That's it. You've still got some fight left in you." The words sounded strange in the silence, as though he were talking to himself as much as the horse. He checked the animal's hooves and saw old shoe nails bent sideways, the marks of neglect. He removed the rope halter and let the horse stand freely. To his surprise, the stallion didn't bolt. Instead, he looked around, as if tasting the air for the first time in years. Ethan saw the faintest lift in his posture, the first sign of spirit returning. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called. The sound of laughter from the auction faded completely. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the single crumpled $1 he had handed over moments before. He looked at it for a second, then tucked it away again. What he had bought wasn't a bargain, and it wasn't a rescue. It was a promise. The horse turned his head, that single good eye reflecting the amber glow of sunset. In that reflection, Ethan thought he saw something unspoken, a quiet question, a faint hope. As he led the stallion down the dirt road toward his ranch, the fading sun stretched their shadows long across the earth. The creak of the leather lead, the soft crunch of hooves against gravel, and the rhythmic sigh of wind through the dry grass were the only sounds left. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the stillness inside him stir with purpose. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether the horse would survive the night or fall before morning, but he felt certain of one thing. He couldn't turn away any more, not from this creature, not from himself. When they reached the ridge overlooking his small pasture, Ethan stopped. Below them, the fields shimmered faintly in the fading light. The stallion raised his head, nostrils flaring, catching the scent of open land and freedom. Ethan loosened the rope, letting it slip through his fingers. The horse didn't move away. He just stood beside him, still and waiting. The moment felt fragile, sacred, a quiet understanding between two beings who had both been left behind. In the distance, a faint breeze carried the echo of the auction yard, the laughter that had once filled it already dissolving into memory. Ethan took a slow breath and placed his hand once more on the stallion's neck. "We'll start over, you and me," he murmured. The horse's ear flicked toward him, a subtle sign of acknowledgement. A small, tired smile touched Ethan's face. The road behind them was full of noise and judgment, but ahead lay silence, the kind that came not from emptiness, but from peace. As the first stars blinked into the darkening sky, Ethan began walking again, the stallion following close behind. The world around them grew quiet, yet within that quiet was something powerful, a beginning no one else had seen coming. And though laughter had chased them out of the auction, only silence followed now, deep and watchful, as if the earth itself waited to see what would happen next. The morning after the auction dawned gray and heavy, clouds pressing low over the valley. Ethan rose before sunrise, his breath visible in the cool air as he stepped outside. The small ranch was silent except for the soft creak of wood and the distant cry of a hawk. In the corner stall of the old barn, the black stallion stood motionless, as though uncertain of his place. His head drooped, one ear twitching at every sound. Ethan watched him for a long moment, studying the slow, uneven rhythm of his breathing. The horse's ribs showed even more clearly in the pale light, his legs trembling under the strain of holding himself up. Ethan moved quietly, filling a bucket with water and a scoop of grain, placing it just inside the stall. The horse flinched when he approached, eyes wide and fearful. "It's all right," Ethan murmured, his voice steady and low. He didn't reach out this time. He simply waited. The stallion hesitated, then took one cautious step forward. The faint rustle of grain seemed to draw him closer. When he finally dipped his head to eat, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. By mid-morning, the old truck rattled up the dirt road and stopped by the gate. Martha stepped out, wrapped in her worn brown coat, her gray hair tied in a bun. She had known Ethan since he was a boy, had been his father's neighbor for decades. Her voice carried a blend of affection and worry. "You actually brought that poor thing home," she said, peering into the barn. Ethan nodded, his hands in his pockets. "He's got a name now," he said quietly. "Shadow." She raised an eyebrow. "Shadow, huh? Fitting for a horse half lost to the dark." Her tone softened. "You sure you can manage him? Looks like he's been through hell." Ethan didn't answer right away. "We both have," he said finally. Martha followed his gaze toward the stallion. "Ethan, your father would have told you to be careful," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "He also said every creature deserves a second chance." Her expression softened further, and she gave a slow nod. "Then make it count." She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "You need help, you holler, all right?" Ethan watched her drive off before turning back to the barn, where Shadow's one clear eye met his. The horse stood still, watchful, as if measuring the man who refused to give up on him. The next few days blurred into a quiet rhythm of patience and persistence. Ethan spent hours near the stall, speaking in low tones, reading aloud from an old book, or simply sitting in silence. He didn't try to touch Shadow again, not until the horse decided he could. The first time Ethan reached out with a brush, Shadow reared back, eyes rolling white with panic. Ethan stepped aside, calm and steady. "Easy," he whispered, setting the brush down. "No rush. You tell me when you're ready." At night, when the wind howled through the fields, Ethan sat by the barn window, his lantern flickering. The sound of the horse shifting in the stall kept him company. Sometimes he caught himself talking aloud about his father, about the ranch, about the loneliness that came with losing too much too soon. He used to say animals don't forget kindness, Ethan murmured one night, his voice soft but certain. Maybe that's still true. The stallion's ears turned toward him at the sound, a quiet sign that something inside the broken creature still listened. On the fifth morning, a light drizzle coated the yard. Ethan decided it was time. He opened the stall door and stepped back, leaving the path to the paddock clear. For a long moment, Shadow didn't move. Then, slowly, he took a step forward, nostrils flaring at the scent of rain. The soft mud sank beneath his hooves as he walked into the open. He paused halfway, head lifted toward the gray sky. A breath escaped him, not quite a whinny, not quite a sigh. Ethan felt something stir deep in his chest. It wasn't triumph. It was relief, quiet and raw. That afternoon, while repairing a fence post, Ethan saw the stallion standing near the edge of the paddock, staring at the hills beyond. The limp in his step was still there, but his posture had changed. He no longer looked beaten. When Ethan approached, Shadow didn't back away. The man lifted his hand slowly and placed it on the horse's neck. This time, Shadow didn't flinch. His skin quivered once, then stilled. Ethan's hand remained there, firm and warm. "There you are," he whispered. The progress was slow but steady. Ethan cleaned Shadow's hooves, trimmed what was left of his overgrown mane, and mixed herbal salves for his scars. He built trust one gesture at a time, an apple offered, a quiet pat on the neck, a walk through the pasture at dusk. Each evening, he found himself talking less and understanding more through silence. The bond that formed between them was wordless, built not on force but on patience. Yet not everyone viewed it kindly. One evening, two men from the auction stopped by the fence, watching with crossed arms. "Heard you picked up the cripple for $1, one of them said, smirking. "He ain't worth the rope you're using to." Ethan didn't rise to the bait. "Worth's not always measured in money," he replied. The other man chuckled. "You'll see. Some things can't be fixed." They left laughing, their voices fading into the wind. Ethan turned back to Shadow, who stood quietly behind him, head lowered but steady. "They said the same thing about me once," he said softly. That night, thunder rolled in the distance, low and rumbling. Rain lashed against the barn roof as Ethan sat near Shadow's stall, lantern light dancing across the walls. The horse shifted restlessly, uneasy with the noise. Ethan rose and placed his hand on the gate. "Easy, boy. It's just a storm," he murmured. A flash of lightning lit the barn in silver light, and for an instant, Ethan saw his reflection in the horse's good eye. Two survivors, both scarred, both enduring. When the storm passed, the world outside was washed clean, the air crisp with renewal. Ethan stepped out to see the morning sun breaking through the clouds. In the yard, Shadow stood near the fence, the light glinting off his dark coat. He turned his head when Ethan approached, ears pricking forward. For the first time, Ethan saw something alive behind that gaze, not fear, but trust forming like dawn over distant hills. Ethan smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small apple. He offered it without a word. The horse took it gently, his breath warm against Ethan's palm. In that simple moment, the weight of every struggle, every loss, every doubt, seemed to lift if only a little. The world felt whole again, if just for a heartbeat. As the day faded, Ethan leaned against the fence, watching Shadow graze under the reddening sky. He knew they were far from finished. The horse was still fragile, and the road ahead uncertain. But something had begun, a quiet partnership that neither time nor mockery could undo. Ethan looked toward the hills, where the wind whispered through the tall grass, and felt a calm resolve settle deep within him. He turned toward the barn, the sound of steady hooves following close behind. Shadow stayed near, his shadow merging with Ethan's in the fading light. The laughter from that auction yard seemed like a memory from another life. What replaced it now was silence, an understanding that healing wasn't a miracle, but a choice made every single day. And as darkness gathered, Ethan whispered into the still air, "We're getting there, boy. One step at a time." Spring arrived quietly, painting the valley in shades of gold and green. Weeks had passed since Ethan brought Shadow home, and the ranch that once felt lifeless now carried the sound of hoofbeats in the morning and the gentle creak of the barn door each dusk. Shadow's strength was returning, though scars still traced his flanks like faint reminders of cruelty. His coat had begun to gleam under the sun, his muscles tightening with each day's effort. Ethan watched him run along the fence line, his limp nearly gone, and felt a warmth that no fire could give. Yet beneath the peace lingered a quiet question. What came next? Healing had begun, but purpose was still waiting to be found. One afternoon, as Ethan repaired a loose gate, Martha's truck rumbled up the path again. She leaned out the window, waving a folded flyer. "You might want to see this," she called. Ethan wiped his hands and took it. It was for the upcoming Spring County Fair, a small-town celebration with livestock showcases, barrel races, and a charity exhibition called the Spirit Ride, where rescued horses were invited to perform simple runs for awareness. "It's not a competition," Martha explained, stepping out of the truck. "Just a show. Folks bring their horses to raise money for the shelter." Ethan glanced toward the paddock, where Shadow stood grazing under the fading light. "You're thinking I should take him," he said quietly. Martha's eyes softened. "I think people should see what you've done here. What he's done." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The flyer lay on the kitchen table, its bright colors a stark contrast to the dim light of his lamp. He thought of the auction crowd, of laughter that still echoed somewhere deep in his memory, and wondered if facing them again mattered. But when he looked out the window and saw Shadow standing tall beneath the moonlight, the decision became clear. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about showing that even the broken could rise again. The next morning, Ethan began gentle training. He started by leading Shadow around the paddock with a saddle blanket across his back. The first few times, the stallion stiffened, his muscles twitching as though bracing for pain. Ethan kept his voice calm, his movements slow. "You're all right," he whispered. "No one's here to hurt you." By the end of the week, Shadow accepted the blanket without protest. Ethan added the saddle next, letting it rest lightly, never forcing. Progress came in fragments, a step, a breath, a calm look, and Ethan celebrated each one silently. The first time he mounted Shadow, it was before dawn. The sky was streaked with faint purple, the earth still damp with dew. He placed one boot in the stirrup and paused, feeling the horse tense beneath him. "It's just me," he murmured, easing his weight forward. For a moment, Shadow's muscles quivered, but then he stilled. Ethan sat upright, barely breathing. They stood there together, the morning air cold and clean, until Shadow took one cautious step, then another. When they finally began to move, it was not a ride but a dance of trust, tentative, fragile, yet beautiful in its simplicity. In the days that followed, their bond deepened. Ethan guided Shadow through the fields, teaching him to respond to soft cues, to follow direction not from reins, but from the rhythm of voice and balance. Each day, the stallion's confidence grew, and with it, Ethan's hope. But not everyone was convinced. At the feed store one afternoon, he overheard two ranchers talking. "That the same man who bought the cripple for $1, one said, laughing. "Saw him riding out there like it's a miracle. You can't fix what's broken that deep." Ethan didn't turn around. He simply paid for his supplies and left, the sting of their words fading as quickly as it came. He had stopped needing their approval long ago. By the time the fair arrived, the air was filled with the scent of dust and grilled corn, the distant hum of music and laughter drifting from the fairgrounds. Ethan loaded Shadow into the trailer, hands steady but heart racing. When they arrived, heads turned immediately. People recognized the stallion, the limp, the scars, the eye gone white, and whispers rippled through the crowd. Ethan ignored them, focusing on the quiet rhythm of Shadow's breathing as he brushed him down. "We're not here to win," he said softly, "just to show them who you are." When their turn came, the announcer introduced them hesitantly. "Next up, Ethan Cole and his horse, Shadow." A few chuckles broke from the stands, faint but familiar. Ethan led Shadow into the ring, the sound of hooves steady and calm. The crowd waited for a stumble, a sign of weakness, but none came. Ethan mounted, and the stallion moved forward with slow, deliberate grace. They began their short routine, circling, trotting, pausing at command. It was simple, modest, yet something about the unity between man and horse drew silence. The laughter that had lingered died out completely. Halfway through the performance, a sudden noise cracked across the field, a burst balloon, sharp and startling. Shadow reared, eyes wide with panic, muscles surging beneath Ethan. Gasps rippled through the audience. For a heartbeat, Ethan felt fear, raw and familiar, but he steadied his voice. "Easy, boy. Look at me." The horse trembled, nostrils flaring, his body torn between flight and trust. Ethan reached forward, hand pressed to his neck. "I'm here. You're safe. Slowly, the stallion lowered his head, his breathing slowing. The crowd held its breath as Ethan guided him forward again, steady and sure. They finished the routine without another misstep. When the announcer's voice returned, it was softer. Ladies and gentlemen, Shadow. Applause began, not loud, but sincere, growing with every clap until it filled the arena. Ethan dismounted, giving the stallion a gentle pat. Shadow's ears flicked back toward the sound, but this time he didn't shy away. He stood tall, proud beneath the sunlight, the faint glimmer of sweat along his coat, shining like polished coal. As Ethan led him out of the ring, a young boy ran up to the fence. "Mister," he called, "is that the horse everyone said was no good?" Ethan paused, smiling faintly. "That's the one," he replied. The boy's eyes widened. "He's amazing." Ethan glanced at Shadow, who snorted softly, his breath rising like mist. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "He always was." Back at the trailer, Martha was waiting, eyes wet with pride. "You did it," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No," he said, brushing a hand over Shadow's mane. "He did." The stallion turned his head toward him, that single good eye reflecting the fading afternoon light. Around them, the noise of the fair swelled again. Music, laughter, the buzz of life, but none of it reached inside the calm that surrounded man and horse. As they prepared to leave, Ethan looked once more toward the crowd, the same kind of faces that had once mocked him. Now they watched in silence, not out of disbelief, but respect. He led Shadow into the trailer, closed the gate, and took a long breath. The laughter that had haunted him had finally been replaced by something new, quiet recognition. On the drive home, the sun dipped below the hills, turning the sky to amber. Shadow shifted gently in the trailer, a rhythmic sound that matched the beating of Ethan's heart. He thought of how far they had come, from a $1 purchase to this moment of peace, and knew the journey wasn't over. There was still more to prove, not to others, but to themselves. He smiled faintly as the road stretched ahead, endless and golden in the last light of day, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow we ride again." The morning after the fair was quiet, the kind of silence that feels earned. The ranch shimmered under a veil of mist, and for the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to breathe without the weight of doubt. Shadow stood by the fence, head low, the soft rise and fall of his chest steady and calm. Ethan leaned against the post, coffee in hand, watching as sunlight slowly unveiled the hills. The stallion turned his head at the sound of his voice. "You were magnificent," Ethan murmured. A faint breeze stirred between them, carrying the earthy scent of dew and hay. It felt like a promise, of peace, of purpose, but promises, Ethan had learned, rarely came without tests. By mid-morning, Martha arrived, dust trailing behind her old truck. She stepped out with a grin that couldn't quite hide her worry. "You've seen this?" she asked, handing him a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Local rancher's miracle horse draws county attention." Ethan scanned the article. There was a photo of him and Shadow mid-performance, the light catching the stallion's mane like liquid silver. Beneath it, a few lines mentioned the upcoming regional exhibition, a competitive event for skilled riders and their horses. "They want you to enter," Martha said softly. "They're calling it a story of redemption." Ethan set the paper down, unease rippling through him. "That's not why we did this." Martha nodded. "I know. But maybe it's time people saw what he's truly capable of, not out of pity, but respect." The decision lingered with him all day. Competing meant exposure, risk. But it also meant a chance to prove that Shadow wasn't just a miracle, he was a fighter. That night, Ethan walked into the barn, the scent of straw and saddle oil thick in the air. Shadow watched him approach, his single clear eye glowing faintly in the lantern light. "They think we should compete," Ethan said. "You up for it?" The stallion shifted, as if understanding, then nudged Ethan's shoulder gently. The gesture was answer enough. Training began the next morning. The regional event demanded precision, speed, balance, grace under pressure. Ethan studied the course layout, sharp turns, narrow gates, jumps that demanded trust. He started slow, guiding Shadow through basic maneuvers, feeling the rhythm of movement settle between them. The stallion's instincts were sharp, his reactions fluid, but there were moments when fear still flickered through him, sudden noises, quick shadows. Each time, Ethan steadied him, whispering calm until the tension dissolved. Progress was steady but fragile, like glass that had been mended but could still fracture under the wrong weight. One afternoon, as they practiced near the riverbed, a stranger on horseback appeared along the ridge. He rode with effortless command, his posture straight, his expression cool. As he approached, Ethan recognized him, Cole Matthews, the reigning champion of the regional circuit. His horse, a gleaming chestnut, moved with coiled strength. Cole reined in beside them. "Heard about your stallion," he said. "Quite the story." His tone was polite, but beneath it lingered a trace of skepticism. Ethan nodded. "He's come a long way." Cole's gaze drifted to Shadow's old scars, his faint limp. "Maybe, but a show horse and a competition horse are two different things." He tipped his hat. "Good luck out there." Then he was gone, leaving a trail of dust and doubt behind him. That night, Ethan lay awake, the words replaying like an echo he couldn't silence. He didn't care about titles or trophies, but he couldn't shake the need to prove that Shadow's worth went beyond survival. When dawn came, he was already in the saddle. Training intensified, longer rides, tighter turns, sharper focus. Shadow stumbled at first, his limp returning in flashes, but Ethan refused to push too hard. Instead, he adapted, finding a rhythm that matched the stallion's strengths rather than forcing perfection. By the final week before the event, they moved as one. Every stride measured, every command answered with instinctive grace. The day of the exhibition dawned cold and gray, the sky veiled with low clouds that promised rain. Trucks and trailers filled the grounds, their metallic sheen catching the early light. Ethan led Shadow through the rows of competitors, aware of every stare that followed. Some whispered in recognition, others simply watched, curiosity mixing with disbelief. Cole Matthews stood near the starting gate, his chestnut gleaming under polished tack. When his eyes met Ethan's, he gave a curt nod, acknowledgement, not friendship. As the announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, Ethan adjusted his gloves. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Shadow's ear flicked back toward him, a silent affirmation. The gate opened. The course unfolded before them, a labyrinth of jumps and turns that demanded absolute trust. Ethan gave a soft click of his tongue, and they moved. The first stretch was smooth, the rhythm steady, hooves striking the dirt in even beats. At the first jump, Shadow lifted cleanly, landing without falter. The crowd stirred, murmuring approval. They cleared the next obstacle, then the next, until the midpoint, where a banner above the stands snapped violently in the wind. The sudden noise jolted Shadow's focus. He hesitated, hooves skidding slightly. Ethan felt the tremor of fear ripple through him, but didn't pull back. "It's all right," he said, voice low but firm. "Trust me." The stallion's ears pinned, breath harsh, but he pushed forward, eyes locked on the next gate. Together, they regained momentum, clearing the final jumps with renewed confidence. When they crossed the finish line, the timer lights flashed green. Their run was clean, fast, precise, almost flawless. Silence held for a moment, then the arena erupted in applause. Ethan dismounted slowly, heart pounding. Cole's run followed, a perfect display of skill, smooth as water. When the results came, Cole took first, Ethan second. Yet when the announcer called Ethan and Shadow forward, the applause rose louder than before. The crowd didn't cheer for victory, they cheered for resilience. Cole approached afterward, extending a hand. "You proved me wrong," he said simply. Ethan shook it, smiling faintly. "Wasn't about you." Cole nodded once. "Maybe not, but it mattered." As evening fell, rain began to drift softly across the fields. Ethan led Shadow toward the trailer, both of them soaked but calm. Martha met them by the gate, her eyes bright. "You didn't win," she said, "but you changed something today." Ethan glanced at the crowd dispersing under umbrellas, their faces alive with admiration. "Maybe that's enough," he replied. They drove home through the drizzle, the sound of rain tapping against the roof like quiet applause. The ranch awaited them, silent, familiar, safe. When Ethan released Shadow into the paddock, the stallion paused, turning his head toward the open fields. He took a slow step forward, then broke into a run, his mane flying wild in the wet air. The limp was barely visible now, replaced by fluid strength and freedom. Ethan watched until the stallion vanished into the mist, a dark silhouette swallowed by the fading light. For a long time, he stood at the fence, rain soaking his coat, a faint smile touching his lips. Shadow had been more than a rescue. He had become a reflection of everything Ethan once thought he'd lost: faith, courage, and the will to begin again. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rumbled, deep and distant, promising another storm. Ethan looked toward it, unafraid. "We'll be ready," he whispered. Behind him, the barn light flickered to life, warm against the dusk. The world, it seemed, had finally stopped doubting them. The past no longer chained them. It had shaped them into something unbreakable. As he turned toward home, the rain eased, and through the clouds a single line of light broke through, soft, golden, and endless.